Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's web seminar on the 2016-17 THP+ and THP+ Foster Care Annual Report. We're really excited about this year's report. We took a little bit of a different approach this year, and we are really looking forward to sharing these findings with you. Before we jump into the content, as usual, we want to make sure people can participate. On the screen, you can see the call-in number and the access code. We do strongly encourage you to submit questions as you have them, and we'll do our best to answer them or to do a follow-up document to answer them. And these materials are going to be on two websites, our main organizational website, which is jbaforyouth.org under Training Archive, and then we also maintain a separate website for THP+ and THP+ Foster Care, and it will be there under past trainings. So today, you're going to be hearing a lot from me, Amy Lemley, Executive Director of John Burton Advocates for Youth, and Simone Turek, our Associate Policy Director, and really, the primary driving force behind this document. And we're very excited that you're here, excited that this information is going to be available. The annual report is a document that we produce every year. I was on the BART ride to work this morning, reminiscing about the very, very first one, many, many moons ago. 10 years it's been, and it's been extremely exciting and a real privilege to see this program grow, this community of practice grow. And once a year, we step back and we look specifically at these two programs. We started first with just THP+ and trying to say, what is the state of play in this program? And then we were so fortunate when care was extended to 21 to be able to fold THP+ foster care into the mix. And so this is what we do once a year, and try to draw out relevant findings that may have implications in practice and in policy. And on the right-hand side of the slide, you see the report. It's been uploaded to the website below. And we are not going to do printed copies this year. It's the first year we're not doing printed copies. We're trying to save a little money. But we do hope you go check out the document, print it out or not. What you're going to hear today is not all of the content. It's what we believe is the kind of content most applicable to the most people. If you're on this web seminar, you probably know what these programs are, and yet we need to start with that, which is, it's focused on THP+ and THP+ foster care. THP+ foster care in the yellow box being the placement for non-minor dependents, 4E reimbursable, modeled really very closely after THP+, after the extension of foster care in 2012. THP+ being a program originally established by AB 427 many, many moons ago, and really has grown and strengthened over the years. It's for former foster youth, 18 to 24. Young people can participate in the program for 24 months with an exception, and we're going to talk about that. These are the programs we're going to be talking about today. First, a word about our methodology so that you can understand, where do we get this information from? Is this applicable to you? And I definitely want to start by putting out a disclaimer. John Burton Advocates for Youth is not Chapin Hall at the University of Chicago. We don't pretend to be, the Mark Courtneys, the, solid, completely full-time, researchers and academics. But we are very pleased and privileged to be able to collect information about young people in both of these programs. And we do that through a participant tracking system. And so every month, the providers from around the state enter information into the participant tracking system for both THP+ and THP+ foster care. This is an entirely voluntary system. We developed this, made it available to the community, and said, if you're interested in using this as a technology to track young people in your program, we invite you to do so. And so the reality is some providers do and some providers don't. So the data that is included in this report includes half of the young people in THP+, and 40% of the young people in THP plus foster care. So you can, take that, think about it. We hope there'll be more users over time. Clearly, the more users there are, the more accurate and reflective the information will be statewide. But we do feel that the information, highlights some very interesting, things that we hope are going to pique your curiosity. In terms of providers, we have about 73% of the THP plus providers entering data, and around, again, 40% of the THP plus foster care providers entering data. County-wise, we have information from 33 counties in THP plus foster care and 37 in THP plus. So that's a little bit of the background. So in addition to the participant tracking system, we draw on information from the California Child Welfare Indicators Project, housed at UC Berkeley, and then we do also extensive interviews with providers and young people. And what we're hoping this is going to stimulate your curiosity to learn more and to take action. And so, as of this moment, we have 154 people on the web seminar, and you're coming to this experience with a lot of different points of view. And we're hoping, whether you're a provider, a county representative, a state representative, an advocate, a youth, or many more stakeholders, that you think about this information and ask yourself, does this apply to my practice? What am I hearing about? Would I like to learn more about? Is there an opportunity to potentially improve my practice? Is there potential to identify policy solutions at the county or state level? So it's really to stimulate that curiosity, to understand how we can work together to improve these programs and to make them as strong as humanly possible, because we have so many young people, thousands of young people around the state relying on them. They're very strong programs, and we are very fortunate in California to have them, and yet we can always take it to the next level. I like to say, let's go from good to great, and I think that's absolutely possible if we are willing to take in information and then to identify actions to take based on that. So now let's jump right into the findings. The first is who are in these programs, and here's a snapshot of who is in THP plus foster care. Interesting point is the demographics have remained relatively constant. There are some slight shifts, as you can see. I'm not going to go through this table, don't worry. The one I'm going to point out, however, is the proportion of youth supervised by juvenile probation has increased from 13% in 2013 to 18% in 2017. And we consider that a very positive development. THP plus foster care is a very service-rich program. It offers comprehensive supportive services. It's in a semi-supervised setting. And young people from juvenile probation can really benefit from it. So this is not a massive increase, but it is a consistent upward tick, which means juvenile probation departments are learning about this placement and finding value in it. And again, we see that as a very positive development. We also see as a very positive development the number of NMDs placed in FC. It continues to increase. So this chart really lays it out from 2013, when really the placement was just getting established, up until April 1st of this year. So we're ticking along. More young people are identifying this as a placement that they want to be placed in, because as we all know, for non-minor dependents, they have a voice and a choice in this conversation, and so we see this as a very positive development as well. We particularly see it as a positive development because as a proportion of placements, NMDs in THP plus foster care has continued to increase. So the numbers in the gray part of the bar show the number of NMDs. And so we kind of peaked in the number of NMDs April 1st, 2015, and we've actually ticked down a little bit in 16 and 17. But as a proportion of placements, THP plus foster care has increased. So we're now at a full 19%, almost 1 in 5 NMDs in foster care in California are living in this placement. Now you might ask yourself, why are we encouraged by that? We're encouraged by that because we believe as an organization that the more common experience of transition age youth is the need for quite regular assistance and support. And, while many young people are being very successful in this SILP, others are not, and access to this range of supportive services is encouraging. So let's turn our attention to Plus. Again, the demographics have remained relatively consistent over time. The big change in Plus is if you look at 2012 under the ages, that's the blue bar at the top of the chart, and then you follow that out to 2016-17, you can see the massive, very significant change in the age. So in 2012-13, over half of our young people in the program were 18 to 20. Now we go to 2016-17, only 13% are 18 to 20. And that reflects the choice of young people to remain in extended foster care. So what we've seen is this program is serving older young people, as silly as that term sounds. It's a very different program than it was even 5 years ago. And as we're going to talk about in this web seminar, the needs of these older young people who often have had more exposure to different kinds of experiences, including parenthood, juvenile probation, or the adult criminal justice system, and homelessness, makes them have a different set of needs. I'll also just bring your attention to the line on the bottom of the chart. Now we're having the opposite experience as we are in THP+ foster care. We're seeing a decreased proportion of young people being from the probation system in Plus. I don't have a great explanation for that. We know young people who are exiting that system need transition assistance. So it's something that piques my curiosity, something we want to have more conversations about to make sure that probation departments know that THP+ is still very much around. It's very much active, and it's a resource to serve young people that are exiting that system. So now we've broken up the report into a series of areas, housing, education, employment, parenting, health, and well-being. And so I'm going to touch on housing, education, employment, and income, and then turn over to Simone to cover the rest of the topics. Following that, we're going to have a discussion of the policy and practice implications. So this first part, we're pretty much going to give you the information we found, the findings. You might think, wow, there's a lot going on here. We are going to have a more dynamic conversation towards the end of the web seminar to really begin to understand or at least discuss what might be happening. So this was a finding. We've never reported on the average length of stay in both of these programs. Historically, this report has been a survey of providers. This year, however, we said, let's pass on that approach, and instead, let's really mine our participant tracking system. Let's use that system to really understand, to investigate areas that we never have before. And what you see on the chart is the first approach at that. So the top bar is THP+ foster care. So the average length of stay, that's between entrance and exit to that program, is 14 months. So a little over a year and 2 months. And that is of a potential length of stay of 36 months. Now, 36 months would be if a young person entered right when they turned 18. They could stay with their foster parent and then enter when they're 19, or even enter when they're 20. But the outside potential duration period of time that they could be in the program is 36 months. The bar under it is THP+, and that is actually even a little shorter, and in some ways even more troubling, because these are former foster youth. And so there, a person could look at that 14.1 months and say, well, they're exiting THP+ foster care and maybe moving into a SILP or maybe moving into a college dorm. The young people in THP+, however, they're out in the real world. They don't have the dependency system as a fallback. And so that is a little bit more troubling because we know they're only utilizing a little bit more than half of their eligibility. So 24 months is the period of time the program is available. I believe it's a select number of counties have opted to extend the length of stay young people can remain in foster care to 36 months if they're enrolled in school. And so for young people in the program in those counties, which I believe is about 21 counties, that the program length is actually 36 months. So, that's another, was a very interesting finding for us. Why aren't young people utilizing more of the program? Why isn't that orange bar a little bit closer to that outside bar? We also investigated for the first time discharge. How many young people are being involuntarily discharged, and how many are being voluntarily exited? And so on the left-hand side, you have the in THP+ foster care. We have a full 33%, so 1 in 3 young people who are being involuntarily discharged. And kind of what that means, so you're thinking like, what does involuntarily discharge means? It means a discharge due to program noncompliance. And those of you who are providers out there know that includes a wide range of circumstances from property damage to non-participation in a participation condition. So that is the THP+ foster care. On the THP+ side, the number is even slightly larger. And so this was, again, the first time we've really looked at this and explored it and began to ask ourselves kind of what's going on. So a question many of you might be wondering on the FC side is, well, of those who are involuntarily discharged, how many are being discharged because they are not doing one of the 5 participation conditions? So with our participant tracking system, we were able to drill down and look at that. And what we found is 23% of young people who were discharged involuntarily were working or attending school. So, would appear that they are meeting at least one of the participation conditions. So that really got our head scratching in terms of if 1 in 5 of those involuntarily discharged is doing something that may appear to be a participation condition, kind of what's going on there? What's happening with that 77%? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the implications. So moving forward, we also look in the housing area, the report about once young people exit these programs, where do they go? And there's just a few things I want to highlight here. The first one is the most common exit for both programs is to renting their own housing or their shared housing, paying rent. So that's something both programs have in common. The second thing I want to point out is that 14%, only 14% of young people exiting FC are entering a THP+ program. This also, is a very interesting finding. We're so fortunate in California to have THP+, to have a housing option for young people once they're done. Why is such a small percentage of young people exiting FC2+? So that is just a big question on our mind. And the last is certainly homelessness. We, as many of you, are very concerned about homelessness among current and former foster youth. In terms of their direct exit from these programs, the numbers are what they are. They're 6% for THP+ foster care and 9% for THP+. Now, that doesn't mean a young person couldn't be in one of these other settings and then subsequently experience homelessness. But it does mean for young people who, the day they leave that THP+ FC program, it is known that they are being discharged to homelessness. So that's that, immediate next step in their housing, experience. We're going to move on to education and talk about this a little bit. So the question is, are you finishing high school? And, we are very pleased to share information, certainly from this report, but also recently reported in our weekly newsletter on federal data that shows our foster youth here in California are beating the national average in terms of holding a high school diploma at age 19 and 21. And the data from this report is very aligned with that. We know at entrance to THP Plus foster care, 70% are holding a high school diploma, and at exit, that number is ticking up to 78%. Same with THP Plus, 78% are holding it at THP Plus, and at exit, it is ticking up to 81%. Now, unfortunately, all of those figures are lower than the general population of Californians at the same age. But it's interesting, at least from the AFCARS data, that they are higher than other states are experiencing. So it leads me to think something is going right, and there's also room for improvement. The findings are a little bit less optimistic, however, when we look at college attendance. You know, our organization puts a lot of energy and effort into access to post-secondary education for foster youth. Let's start with THP Plus on the left-hand side. Upon entering THP Plus foster care, a full 1 in 5 is enrolled in attending a community college. At exit, however, it actually decreases. And when we have additional data that is available that shows a very common trajectory is dropping out of college. So essentially, 1 in 5 enter. Over the course of their participation in the program, there's a lot of enrollment activities, but the real question mark is around college retention. By the time they end up exiting, they're no longer in. You know, the percentage actually goes down. If you look at THP Plus, upon entrance to the program, the figure's a little bit lower, and we're actually making some positive gains, but very, very modest. But if you add, the columns for entrance and the columns for entrance, it tells a story really that, for most current and former foster youth, college is not the most common experience for young people in these programs. And I'll just say one thing before we move on to this, is to contrast this data with the policy brief that was issued by Mark Courtney and his team at Chapin Hall that really found, as a state, all of our placements, that the percentage attending college is much higher. It's right around 50%. So what is interesting and what this gives us pause and makes us wonder and think about is the young people in these programs are likely kind of more vulnerable and more fragile. They're not achieving the same kind of success. There are more services, but they're also facing more challenges. So that's just a little bit to think about in terms of post-secondary education. So I'm going to whip through this really quickly because I want to hand it over to Simone around employment and income. Both of these programs, particularly Plus, the strength has been employment. That has been kind of we've always seen positive employment gains in these programs in every one of the 10 annual reports. And you see in the bar chart, both programs, some good progress between entrance to exit. And so, it's not easy helping young people who are young and relatively low skilled get jobs and keep jobs. So it's a testament to the good work happening in a lot of different places. And in income, we're also seeing significant progress. The average hourly wage increases, not tremendously, I don't want to overstate this, in both programs. And the average monthly income from all income sources, and so that's earned income as well as non-earned income, also increases from $942 to $1180 in FC and $945 to $1130 in Plus. Now, the dark side of both these rate of employment and the income is that it's still very low. So while we're making progress, we're not going backwards. And I have absolutely no doubt, absent these programs, there would be backward slide. But it is still a very low income, and it's a pretty low rate of employment. So it speaks to the challenges here. Just one interesting finding, we do find at exit, the parenting young people are employed at a higher rate than non-parenting, which is, I think, a quite interesting finding. And so from here, I'm going to hand it over to Simone, who's going to talk us through the children and parenting section. Thank you, Simone.
Thanks, Amy. It's great to be, as Amy mentioned, back on our annual report webinar sharing these findings. And I'm going to talk about children and parenting here. So first, people's question really is, well, what are the numbers that we're looking at here? Amy, if you can just advance to the next slide. How many parenting youth are in THP+FC and THP+? And, we find, this slide gives you kind of a magnified look at the issue by kind of just providing data on custodial mothers, so only female participants. And, this is the percentage of young women who are custodial mothers at entrance to the programs and then at exit. And as you can see, kind of not surprisingly, there are more parenting youth in THP+. This is an older population. What's not on this slide that you might have a question about, so I'll just answer it now, is what are the percentages for both genders? In THP+FC, 13% of all youth, men and women, enter as custodial parents, and then at exit, the percentage is 21%. And in THP+, 16% of young men and women enter as custodial parents, and at exit, 26% are custodial parents. But back to the data on this slide, we find, as I mentioned, kind of when you look at the female-only data, it's a bit more telling. And really because in most cases, the children are residing with the mother in the majority of these situations. And as you can see in THP+FC, 21% of young women enter the program as custodial mothers, and then 34% exit the program as custodial mothers. In THP+, 26% enter the program as custodial mothers, and 40% exit the program as custodial mothers. And this data is fairly consistent with what we see in the Cal Youth study. Relatively, they looked at most recently data for youth at age 19, and that told us the rates of pregnancy were, well, 49% of young women reported ever having been pregnant, but 26% reported having ever given birth to a child, and that's at age 19 again. So you can kind of look at those comparisons there. The next slide, we get this question too sometimes, and we can kind of answer part of it here. Do all parents have custody of their children? And what this really means, do all parents have their children residing with them in the program? The answer is no. As I mentioned a second ago, in many cases, when a young man fathers a child, the child might be residing with the mother only. There are some vice versa cases. The majority is they're residing with the mother. But and in some cases they might be cohabitating, but in many there aren't. And, there are also scenarios where, family members or someone else is caring for this person's child. And so, and we also know in some cases they may have been removed by CPS, but we really don't know what the breakdown is within this percentage. What we do know, and what you see on the screen, is that at entrance to THP+FC, 11% of youth who enter the program stating that they previously birthed or fathered a child do not have that child in their custody when they enter the program. And then in THP+, 30% of youth who have had children are entering the program without their child or their children in their custody. So are youth who enter as parents more likely to have subsequent children while in the program? This is something that was a pretty, this data was pretty kind of, this stood out to us a lot. As you can see, yes, the answer is yes. When compared to their peers who entered without children, youth who enter as parents are more likely to have subsequent children while in the program. If you look at those percentages there, you see that there's a significant difference between the 35% of those youth in THP+FC who entered as custodial parents had a subsequent child while in the program, compared to just 7% of youth who were not parents at the start of the program but became parents while in the program. In THP+, 29% of those who entered as parents had children while in the program, had additional children. compared to just 11% of youth who entered not as parents and had their first child while in the program. So we can now, we're going to move on to health and well-being. So the first thing here that you're looking at, are youth connected to public benefits upon exit from the programs? Well, as you can kind of see here, not too many. We know from looking at the data, the most commonly accessed benefit is CalFresh, which, are food stamps. 16% of youth in THP+FC were accessing CalFresh, and 36% of youth in THP+ were accessing CalFresh. And again, we keep jumping back to the Cal Youth study, but it's a great resource here. In the Cal Youth study, 1 in 3 youth reported having ever accessed CalFresh, and that's a little more consistent with the THP+ rate, but higher than the FC rate for sure. And then when looking at receipt of WIC, you see that in the Cal Youth study, or when you look at WIC in the Cal Youth study, you see that over 9 in 10 mothers reported ever receiving WIC, and over 4/5 reported that they were currently receiving WIC. But in THP+FC and THP+, you see that just 11% of youth in THP+FC and 9% of youth in THP+ were receiving WIC benefits. And we know that that is not the percentage of parenting youth. That's less than the percentage of parenting youth. And I think we'll cover this more later, obviously, in our implications, but that's just a little bit of a kind of window into what benefits receipt looks like. So other findings related to health and well-being. So fantastic news here is that, almost 100% of youth in THP+ report having health insurance, 99%. And I really, this was a really great figure to sit and look at. As you know, the Affordable Care Act extended Medi-Cal to age 26 for former foster youth. They are legally, they should all former foster youth should have health insurance up to age 26. There's no reason that they shouldn't. And, in California, they're eligible even if they were in foster care in another state at age 18 or older. Our law with this is great. And, the coverage includes medical care, vision exams, substance abuse treatment, mental health services, counseling, dental care. We want to make sure that all former foster youth are connected to insurance. And so it looks like that things have actually gone in the right direction. There were some hiccups in the beginning. Children Now did a ton of work to try to address those, but they still, just so people know, in case they don't know, have a website called, it's coveredtill26.childrennow.org. And if any former foster youth have issues with enrolling in health insurance up to age 26, it's a great resource. So definitely go to that website. And then just to clarify, all youth participating in THP+FC are automatically covered by Medi-Cal because they're dependents of the child welfare system or supervised by juvenile probation system, and so they have that. The box at the bottom, the gray box, tells you how many youth report being connected to mental health services upon exit and also substance abuse services upon exit. As you can see, 27% in THP+ are accessing mental health services at the time that they're exiting, and just 21% in THP+FC. And then you can see that very few are accessing substance abuse treatment in either program at the time of exit. So now we are going to move on to homelessness and talk a little bit about this issue that is such a topic of discussion a lot lately. We know there's a housing crisis in our state, and there's definitely a lot of talk about homelessness. And so let's look a little bit look at the data here and see what it's looking like for youth in these programs. So there are a few different questions in the participant tracking systems that ask about whether youth have experienced homelessness. One of them asks whether the youth has experienced 1 or more nights of homelessness prior to entering the program. So for THP+, it would be between foster care and entering THP+, and for THP+FC, it would have been, prior to entering that placement. And then the other question asks whether the youth is entering the program directly from homelessness or unstable housing, and to define unstable housing, that includes a shelter, living in your car, couch surfing, or living on the street. And in THP+, more than half, so 52% of youth have experienced homelessness prior to entering the program, and 31% enter the program directly from homelessness or unstable housing. In THP+FC, exactly 1/4 of youth experienced homelessness prior to entering, and 8% enter directly from homelessness or unstable housing. And now we've been looking at this issue for youth in THP+ since 2008, when we launched the THP+ participant tracking system, and we've really watched it creep up, since 2010-11. For THP+FC, the participant tracking system was just launched in 2015, so we don't have the same historic data. This is really the first year that we've had enough data, from the previous year to report out on and really do a deep dive on the data, so which is exciting. But of course, we don't have the same historic data as we do in THP+. But you'll see here, I mean, this is concerning. Over half of the youth have experienced homelessness when they enter THP+. And what you'll hear in just a second is about some other risk factors that might be popping up for youth who have experienced homelessness. So this year we really did, like I said, a deep dive into the data. One of the things we looked at was whether there were, associations or correlations between various different, indicators. And so one was between past homelessness and kind of other adverse outcomes. And information like this, it's helpful. It can allow providers and counties to have a better idea of what youth might be vulnerable to, and then can shape their programs accordingly. And what we found is when it comes to past homelessness, there were really 4 areas where we noticed these correlations. So the first one you'll see on the slide, youth who entered THP+ directly from homelessness or unstable housing were more likely to exit the program to homelessness, to a shelter, to unstable housing, to homelessness. As you can see, just 9% of youth who exited THP+ exited to homelessness or unstable housing generally. But when we isolated youth who entered directly from homelessness, we noticed that 14% of those youth exited to homelessness or unstable housing. The second thing that we noticed was that there was a correlation between parenting youth and homelessness in THP+FC. When we looked at youth who entered the program as custodial parents, 30% of them had experienced homelessness prior to entering the program, whereas when we looked at youth who entered that were not parents, 24% had experienced homelessness prior to entry. And just because you're hearing a lot of numbers today, I'll just clarify. A couple slides ago, you saw that of all youth in THP+FC, 25% experienced homelessness prior to entry. This is a different figure than this 24%, just to clarify, because the 24% is just looking at data on youth who are not parents at entrance, so it's slightly lower. The third thing we noticed was, although only a slight difference, we wanted to highlight this because, these are things that, require further investigation, right? Youth in THP+ that experienced homelessness prior to entering the program were more likely to have children while in the program. Of youth who entered directly from homelessness, 16% had a child while in the program, whereas of youth who entered the program from stable housing, 14% had a new child while in the program. And then the last thing here, I want to kind of take a moment just to explain this. The fourth correlation we found was that youth who entered THP+ directly from homelessness were more likely to be involved with the criminal justice system generally. So I'll start with the data on youth's experience before entering the program. You can see what's circled. On the far left, you see the percentage of youth who were detained or incarcerated prior to entering the THP+ program. So the orange bar has the percentage that entered from stable housing, and the gray bar is the percentage that entered from homelessness or unstable housing. Okay, and the middle circled one is youth who had been convicted of a misdemeanor prior to entering the THP+ program, and then on the way right is youth who had been convicted of a felony prior to entering the program. So you can see this activity here is all for youth before they entered the program, and it is across all fronts. The percentage is, pretty significantly higher for youth who entered the program from homelessness. And just move forward here. There we go. And then you can see now what's circled is the experience of youth during the program. That's circled here is now their experience, during the program. So kind of between entrance and exit. So on the left, the percentage incarcerated or detained. Again, in the middle, percentage convicted of a misdemeanor. On the right, percentage convicted of a felony. Now, the biggest divide you see here is really with the data on overall, is really with the data on incarceration and detainment. And just to clarify, this is defined as held in jail or other detention facility for any period of time, even if not ultimately charged or convicted. And that's an important distinction because this includes youth that could have been unlawfully detained. So this doesn't necessarily mean all of these youth are committing crimes. This just means that they have had contact with the adult criminal justice system. And I think we know that a lot happens, that, there's racial profiling. There's just, things that happen that don't always mean that youth are at fault. And we'll talk more about this in the implications section, but it's something that's important to consider when looking at the data. And so that kind of jump-started us to kind of talk about some of the additional findings about involvement with the criminal justice system. Now we know that a small portion of youth in THP+FC and THP+ have been involved with the juvenile probation system. But these slides are really talking about, the involvement with the adult criminal justice system. And you can see first here, what's the incidence of involvement. So overall, about 1 in 8 youth in either program have some sort of involvement with the law during their time in the program. You can see youth are entering THP+FC with no adult record. They are younger. They're closer to just turned 18. But while they're in the program, 13% are being detained by the police or incarcerated, and then 5% are being convicted of a misdemeanor and 2% of a felony. In THP+, this looks a bit different. They have some more years under their belt there. 16% are entering as having already been detained and or incarcerated at some point prior to entering, and 13% are detained or incarcerated during the program. 7% are entering with a misdemeanor. 7% are also exiting with a misdemeanor, having been convicted during the program. And then lastly, 5% are entering as having been convicted of a felony, and then 3% are having been convicted of a felony during the program. So lastly here on this section, when we looked at the data on youth who were previously involved with the juvenile justice system and those who were supervised by that agency versus child welfare, we noticed that there was a higher likelihood that probation youth would go on to become involved with the criminal justice system. On the left, you see data on youth in THP+FC, and on the right, you see data on youth in THP+. The orange bar is the probation youth, and the gray bar is the child welfare or the dependent youth. For THP+FC, there's a significant difference between the percentage that had been detained and or incarcerated and those who have been convicted of a misdemeanor, but you see there's not a difference between felony convictions. For THP+, there is a difference in all 3 areas. So now I'm going to turn it back over to Amy to take us through some of our policy and practice implications.
Thank you very much, Simone. And let's talk about it. Well, the first area, if you know John Burton Advocates for Youth, we think and talk a lot about college access to post-secondary ed. Is the data is leading us to believe that the programs are making limited progress in college. There is some progress, and we're not going backwards. We know from the Cal Youth Study and the subsequent policy briefs that extended foster care, the most powerful effect of extended foster care is participation in post-secondary ed. And Mark Courtney's study finds that for every month you remain in care, it increases your likelihood by 8% of going to post-secondary ed. When we look at these 2 programs, however, we see about 1 in 5 young people enrolled. So the kind of question is, these are great programs, strong programs that have public funding. How do we really change these programs to make them college support programs and to change our orientation from that college is for the exceptional, and I'm using air quotes, foster youth, to every foster youth. And when we say post-secondary ed, we mean the over 2,000 sub-baccalaureate post-secondary education credentialing programs as well. And so on this slide, are some thoughts. Everyone has a role to play in this. If you're the provider, if you're the campus, if you're the county or the state, these on the slide are just some examples of things we can do. One I want to highlight on the provider level, we're working with a subset of providers around the state to reorient their programs to emphasize post-secondary ed and to shift their conventional case management model to a more of an academic coaching model. They're doing a lot of other really neat things, but they're approaching post-secondary education as something every young person is engaged in, and changing practices such as work requirements into income requirements. Because there's nothing great in and of itself about working if that same income can be earned through the Pell Grant, the CHAFE, the Cal Grant. And so really seeing our programs set up to promote and support college, or is our working kind of expectation they're just supposed to work. The second group to think about is the state level, is what, we currently have amazing state law on the K-12 education requirements of foster youth, but it drops off to almost nothing when we get to the post-secondary education level. Given that we know without some type of post-secondary education training, we will be raising young people in poverty. So we say, well, they're not minors anymore, they can do what they want to do, but is that the kind of approach we would take to our own children? And so what can we do at the state level, since they are dependents of the state, to change the orientation, to really strengthen the emphasis on post-secondary ed? One approach is, better information on the FAFSA completion. Statewide, 55% of students complete the FAFSA. What's our FAFSA completion rate for foster youth? We should know that. We should be able to know what it is and why it is what it is and what we're going to do to increase it. Also, just stronger requirements on college application. That's something our organization and many others are working on, to say, we can't make young people go to college, but we can make sure that we raise it with them. Another area on the campus level is, access to campus support programs like Guardian Scholars Program, and then access to benefits such as priority registration and priority to on-campus housing. At the county level, there's a lot to do as well, that doesn't require a change in policy. One is Foster Youth Services Program, through recent state legislation, is now the Foster Youth Services Coordinating Program. So that is our publicly funded county agency that's now, due to this new legislation, doesn't just stop at K-12, it's charged with post-secondary education preparation. So if you're a county personnel, really, figuring out how does this old program that has a new name and a new mandate interface with our approach? Where is it in the puzzle? And I think counties around the state are trying to figure that out, as well as asking, and that program is in the County Office of Education. And then other is just regularly, for the young people, and the counties you place the young people. You are the real center of the wheel, really looking at, who is getting young people in college and who isn't. And I know placements are so hard and there's such a shortage of them, and it's kind of like, I don't want to say beggars can't be choosers, but letting providers know and others know that we're thinking about this, we're interested in it, we're going to be measuring it, and we want to see it go up. A second implication is really around this issue of unintended pregnancy, and particularly repeat pregnancy. The big aha for me in this report is we know these young people are not in these programs a terribly long amount of time. So 14 months for FC and 13 months for Plus. And yet in that relatively short amount of time, they're having subsequent pregnancies. So the implication here for certainly the providers, if young people have children, they are the most at risk for having another child. So a core element of case management for any parenting dependent is discussing their family planning. You know, that this is a very critical element, because within a short amount of time, they are having a subsequent pregnancy. And so there's a real risk factor there. And what we really learned, you know, again, thanks to the Cal Youth study, is that 2 out of 3 young people who do become pregnant that's an unwanted and unintended pregnancy. So it's not to tell young people who want to become young parents not to become young parents. It's to help young people think through their family planning decisions, give them access to care and information that they require. And so there are efforts underway, and you can see some of them on this slide. But you know, these programs are just a place, a massively great opportunity to intervene, to say, let's try and help young people take this on and think about it, because we can see that there's a high rate of pregnancy, both first pregnancies and subsequent pregnancies. Another area, policy implication for us is, you know, why are these public benefits, specifically CalFresh and WIC, which stands for Women, Infant, and Children, why the low rate of utilization? We know how many young people are pregnant. We also know what their incomes are. And so based on these monthly incomes, they likely meet the gross income eligibility for CalFresh. And so, you know, every young person's different. They have a different situation. They might be getting, they might be a student, but really stepping back and saying, CalFresh can be a tremendous supplement to the income of foster youth, and can make a big difference, particularly in the life of a parenting dependent. And so figuring out both on the policy and the practice level on how we can move that needle. And as it says at the bottom of this slide, CDSS is currently developing guidance for counties specifically regarding foster youth applying for CalFresh. It's not a simple program. It's complicated, but we need to find a way to push through and improve access to this. Again, back to the Cal Youth study, we know the percentage of young people who are reporting that they are food insecure. And so to know that while we have this tremendous federally funded program, largely federally funded program that is about food insecurity, you know, we can figure it out. We can close that gap. We have another gap in Women, Infant, and Children, another very effective public benefit program. And as you can see from this slide, to receive it, you have to earn less than 185% of the federal poverty level, which is $30,044 in the 17-18 fiscal year, and be one of those categories. Well, again, we go back to what percentage of our young people are parenting. 40% of our young people, our young women, are leaving the program as a custodial parent. And certainly even people who had birth before that, it's a child up to their 5th birthday. And so the WIC is different than CalFresh. It's not a cash amount. There's an allowable set of food types that can be purchased, but it's a lot of different options. And overall, it can bring anywhere from $100 to $150 in additional purchasing power into a household. So again, I wish I could give you the silver bullet about why it's underutilized. And I think we're in a brave new world, if I can say so, where we have, you know, non-minors in foster care. And so at every turn, we're brushing up against programs, and foster youth are just not a population that these programs, you know, they understand if you are a foster youth and you're dealing with a foster parent, but for the actual foster youth NMD themselves to be applying, it can be very confusing. And so working together to get clarity so that these programs can be accessed. This is probably, I think, one of our, you know, bigger areas where we believe there are really important policy implications, that youth are not participating in the full length of the programs. So, you know, we go back to the context. We have a housing crisis. And I am a former provider, and I just want to say that the point of this, these placements, THP+FC, is in the context of a lot of placements. And so it really is time to step back and ask ourselves, how can we promote young people to engage in these programs for a longer period of time? One thing that extended foster care did is it essentially removed the option of a congregate setting. And so we know that some young people who have very extreme needs are being placed in THP+ foster care. And whether that program is fully equipped to meet those needs is, I think, a very fair question. But that can't be everyone. And so we're sharing this data with you for you as a provider and as a county representative to be curious, what is your average length of stay? Do you have a way to find that out? Do you have a good reason for why it is not 24 months or 36 months? That's a conversation that needs to happen locally. We're highlighting the information, but from here, you need to take it down to the local level because it doesn't make sense to have these public programs and to be churning young people through them. We want them to utilize the because it's not like they're in the program and springboarding into the middle class. They're leaving the programs pretty economically fragile. They're leaving the programs low income and marginally employed. And so the way I always think about it is how can we keep the bread baking in the oven a little bit longer? One approach that we're talking about is migrating towards more of a housing first model. And this is a model that really that has been shown to increase the length of stay in housing. It can be very challenging for some people. It is the model that the state of California has adopted for all of its housing programs. Senator Holly Mitchell sponsored legislation. But what it does is it says the point of the housing program is to house people. And so, how do extra requirements that we pile on to programs, what impact do they have on the length of stay? So I think it's worth investigating. It's worth an interesting conversation because we also don't have definitive data that the services that we're providing are resulting in the outcomes we want. And so absent that evidence, and with evidence that a more housing first approach actually lengthens the amount of time an individual is housed, it's at least worthy of a conversation to explore whether this is a way of adapting these programs to increase the length of stay. The second area is really the high rate of involuntary exits. Now we say high, but there's no objective reality here. We believe, about 1 in 3 is high. It feels high, but there's no book of rules to say that is high. It intuitively felt high to us in terms of what is that about? And so for us, it raises questions, and we hope, one is you go back and you ask, you have that conversation locally. So the question is, are the program requirements aligned with the needs of participating youth? Are there youth in these programs that need more than programs are able to provide? Do we need some type of setting for young people with more complex needs? Secondly, and also around THP+, so now we have older youth in care. They're more likely to have experienced homelessness. They're more likely to be entering from homelessness. They're more likely to have adult criminal justice participation. Have we retooled THP+ for this older, higher need profile? These are not the young people of 2008, 2009. These are young people who are coming into the programs much more challenged. As we've talked about repeatedly, the program has been realigned. The program is 25% underspent statewide. And so there's really the capacity at a local level to go back as community partners and say, do we need to beef up the rate for some young people in THP+, young people with severe mental health needs, young people with potentially 2 or 3 children? Realignment, it does give the local discretion to do that kind of creative thinking. And so we just really encourage that to us, that the rate of involuntarily discharge means it's not a one-size-fits-all. There's nothing stopping any county from having a tiered rate structure to create local programs that meet the deeper needs. Now to the second part of it is THP+FC. There's a real question out there. So we know to be in extended foster care, you have to be meeting one of 5 participation conditions. We also know, however, that it's not uncommon for additional requirements to be put on young people by individual providers. So I think the rate of involuntary discharge that we have identified, and the fact that 1 in 4 of the involuntary youth discharged appear to be working or going to school, I think it really merits a conversation at the local level and potentially the state level about whether providers should be adding those additional requirements that aren't part of the federally mandated 5 participation conditions, because if they're leading to discharge either voluntarily or involuntarily, it raises that question. And so that for us is the policy implication here. What is the level of local discretion above and beyond the 5 federally identified participation conditions to discharge a young person from extended foster care, specifically THP+ foster care? And again, I'd be all for it if they're springboarding into living wage employment and stable housing. We know that's not the case. And so one analogy that Simone has told me about that's very interesting is an approach that they used at an organization that she formerly worked with, where they did not want to have to contain a child physically. And their goal was to actually minimize that. And they actually counted the number of times that happened. This may sound a little bit, wild for you, but what about the idea of actually trying to track and set goals around reducing discharges, voluntary or involuntary? But instead of seeing discharges as a failure on the part of a young person, to kind of put ourselves as adults more centrally in that conversation to say, what can we do to meet this young person, to, as an organization, make discharges something that we measure and that we consider collectively a negative thing. So from here, I'm going to turn it over to Simone, who's going to touch base on all the aspects of homelessness and their implications.
Thanks, Amy. So I think we'll try to do this 5 minutes and then move into Q&A. If you recall some of the slides that I covered earlier, we found 4 different risk factors associated with having experienced past homelessness. We talked about future homelessness, more likely to experience homelessness if you're a custodial parent, more likely to have a child while in the program, and then to criminal justice involvement. So if I was a provider, I'd probably, or county, I would take this information and really think about, what does this all mean? What do I do with this information? I think one thing is thinking about your intake process, and many programs are already all over this, but, having specific things that raise red flags for additional support. When a youth is coming into your program, if they've had certain experiences such as prior homelessness, what does that mean to you? What are you doing with that information? It's a great kind of clue as to, providing them some more support in those 4 specific areas. And so it's information to take and think about how you can shape your program to better support youth. And for the sake of time, I think let's move on. You can kind of see what's on the slide there. I'm not going to go through and read it all. So here, 25% of THP+FC participants, if you recall, experienced homelessness prior to entering the program. And then 8% entered directly from an emergency shelter or homelessness or other unstable housing, which makes them, as we know, at greater risk for homelessness at exit. And then the rate of homelessness prior to entry in THP+FC is even higher for youth who enter as custodial parents, 30%. So all of this data tells us, youth are experiencing homelessness while they're in foster care as a non-minor dependent. And this is, I feel like, deja vu. We had just literally the same conversation last year on this webinar. Almost embarrassing to say, it's the same issue. And this is technically not supposed to be possible. If a youth is in extended foster care, they are by law entitled to a foster care placement, even if they don't have the resources or capabilities to be in a supervised independent living placement. which might mean that a county needs to increase their THP+FC beds to provide additional options, or think about what we can do creatively. Maybe there's a need for some legislative changes, but what about also what can happen at the local level? One option I've heard, a county that holds beds open as an emergency option that's licensed as a THP+FC placement as interim beds, and they're held open, and then youth go into them when they're awaiting placement, and they cycle out of them and make them available for other youth when the next youth needs them. So then here, when youth exit the THP+FC program, just 1 in 8, 14% move into a THP+ program, despite their eligibility for the program. And we don't know why this number is too small. Honestly, I think we kind of expected that it would be higher. And I know that one issue, I'll just say, that many THP+ programs have is waiting lists. So at the risk of, sounding like a broken record, we just can't underscore enough the importance of making use of your THP+ realignment allocation and spending those dollars on THP+. If there's a waiting list in your county, there shouldn't be unused THP+ dollars. Moving on, youth supervised by the juvenile probation system are considerably more likely to experience adult criminal justice involvement. And we talked about this a little bit prior, but, and I won't go over the data, but I think it's critical that providers and counties are aware of this heightened risk, again, so they can plan accordingly when they're shaping their programs. And it's about, how can you support youth when they become involved with the law? Not just how can you prevent it, but it is going to happen in some cases. So what's your protocol? What's your plan when a youth calls you and says they've been arrested? What are your resources? Do you have an attorney on your board? Are youth being adequately represented by their public defenders? Kind of what are the things that you need to have in place when that's happening in your program? Are youth receiving training or information about how to respond when they do come into contact with the law? These rates, again, aren't always necessarily meaning youth are breaking the law, but it does mean that they're coming into contact with the law. So kind of helping them navigate that. And then our last slide here, youth are transitioning out of THP+FC and THP+ programs with very low incomes. And, there's a lot in this slide here. I'll kind of let you digest it. But yes, more youth are working at exit than an entrance, but it's still, not the vast majority of youth, and they're still earning very little. One thing that I'll say is just, and Amy talked about this earlier, the importance of bringing awareness to the career and technical education programs offered at our community colleges. There are so many, and there's some great tools the Chancellor's Office has that can really help youth kind of assess themselves and see what careers that they might honestly be interested in or good at, and can really, they're short-term programs and can really help them make a living wage versus, they're working a minimum wage job, saying, I want to be employed. We get it, but trying to push them into better long-term outcomes. So now I am going to unmute, just echoing. Unmute. Sorry about that. So now I'm going to turn it over to Amy before we launch Q&A and just ask her to, she's going to make a very timely request of all of you on the webinar to just help us get this important law passed.
I'll just say briefly, one of the policy implications around higher ed is SB 12. This is something, a bill that's authored by Senator Bell. And for those of you who have supported it, we really appreciate it. And it very fortunately made it out of the legislature yesterday, and it's going to be moving over to the governor's desk. And so if you can, we would really appreciate a support letter. The fiscal on it is a whopping $56,000 a year. But with the level of competing priorities in the state of California, very worthy competing priorities, and all the uncertainty at the federal level, it's not done till it's done. And so we really need your help. So we'll put that letter in the follow-up email. But I do want to now go to your questions, and a lot of really great comments. One thing I want to start with is many people have emailed in and talked about the complications with CalFresh. One person wrote in and said, unfortunately, the youth are in THP+ foster care are not qualifying for CalFresh in our county as their FC is considered income. So another person said, one thing we've seen in our county is that youth in THP+FC are being given inappropriately small amounts of CalFresh, $16, because their income is calculated incorrectly. It says advocates have been resolving these cases one by one in our county, but I'm not sure if this is a problem in other counties as well. I think, and this is a very fair point that's being made, is one thing to keep in mind is that when they're leaving THP+FC, they're not necessarily leaving AB12. So they may have unstable housing for a short period of time by going into a SILP. So absolutely, we know that exiting FC does not necessarily mean they're exiting plus. There is, of course, the SILP. And so that's a very good and fair point to make. I think another question, we can't answer it right now, but I'm going to put it out there because it's a great question, is was there a certain type of THP plus or THP+FC that had lower involuntary discharge charges? And as you on this web seminar likely know, that there's the host family, the single site, or the scattered site. So we're going to run that and see if we can figure that out and dig into that a little bit more. One thing we did look at very carefully is, was this just a few bad apples? Like, was this a matter of like a couple providers were like 4 weeks and then a couple providers were 23 months and then we got an average of 13 or 14 months? That wasn't the case. That it was extremely consistently spread. But we haven't looked into those specific subtypes of both of these programs, and we will absolutely do that. Another question, I'll pose this one for you, Simone. Have there been any significant trends in how long youth are staying in THP Plus on average over the past 10 years? Are they staying for longer or shorter periods of time?
That's something that we have looked at in our past reports, and there's been some variation, but nothing as drastic as, say, the homelessness data or something where we've seen these huge spikes or drops. But that's something that we could also make some sort of bar chart on to show how the average has changed over the past several years and maybe provide it as a follow-up.
Here's an interesting point. The data we've collected about homeless NMDs we work with suggests that youth who are victims of domestic violence and sexual exploitation also experience higher rates of homelessness. Is data being collected about these youth and how THPs are addressing their need? So those are not two categories, but what you're saying that are in the participant tracking system, but what you're saying, makes a lot of sense. In terms of, young people who have these extremely, serious risk factors for homelessness and are often having to take extreme measures, including leaving settings to keep themselves safe. Let's see. Here's a question. Is anyone aware of efforts to educate providers to understand their obligations under California housing law? We're seeing a lot of youth being illegally exited from housing. Well, I'll just say what I think there can always be more education. And I say this as a former provider. I think often, particularly in THP Plus, we somehow think we're exempt from fair housing law, or I did anyway, until we actually did a full audit to understand our obligations and that they are there. THP Plus foster care is different because it is a foster care placement. It doesn't mean they don't have any rights, but they are different than THP Plus. And so I think that, this point is really raising another potential, big implication, which is how do we help young people navigate their legal rights when they're being discharged involuntarily? And certainly making sure that a young person who you're recommending be discharged has access to legal counsel. There are many organizations around the state that do this, the tenant defense, and making sure that you're the provider, you're giving them that number and that they're holding you accountable for doing it right. Now, I know that sounds probably crazy to the providers, but that is what we did in my former role. And it kept all parties really clear about what we were able to do and what we're not able to do, because it's not that, providers don't have any capacity to discharge young people, but often, a young person's worried about it going to legal eviction, having their record, permanently tarnished, and so they move out of that setting. And sometimes, and I'm not saying always, they're not having all of their kind of rights maintained. Here's a question. Previous reports have highlighted drops in funding for THP Plus and also overall number of youth served. Do you think this is affecting the implementation or scope of THP Plus? Are there going to be any further decreases in the program's capacity? Do you want to take that one on, Simone?
Sure. So we did look, when the realignment report came out a few months back, we did look at spending. Now there's a delay in that data because it comes from the previous fiscal year. So we don't have 16-17 data, we have 15-16 data now. There was an increase in THP Plus spending, but as a state, we are still underspent. So meaning some counties are not spending their full THP Plus realignment allocation. And so kind of to the point I made earlier, some counties are spending that full allocation and they have wait lists. Some counties are not spending their full allocation and they might have wait lists. And so that's why we said to make sure and examine if you have a need, a demand in THP Plus, take a look at your spending and make sure that you might not be accessing all of that funding that's available for THP Plus. And so to make sure and look into that.
And that's even a question we get from county representatives. This is a very small program in the context of their budgets. The mandate is huge on the county level. So no one is certainly suggesting that even at the local level, it cannot totally be known. There's so many moving parts. We're in the midst of CCR, resource family approval. This little $35 million program can kind of fall through the cracks. So this is something, as a county representative, you might even be curious about, like, what are we doing? Are we still putting this money out? And so take a look at it anew and see if you are a county that's underspent. The hard part, as Simone said, is the realignment report is a year late. So we got information in April for 15-16, which it just makes it difficult to really kind of know what's going on. But at the local level, you're in a great position to have these conversations. And frankly, that's the most, helpful place to have them. I'll just take two more questions and then I think we'll let everyone go. This one is a really good one. I'm really glad it came up. It says, are individual K-12 school records being accessed and reviewed when they come into the program? I'm very disturbed that our service providers that contact our organization for information have not explored what their clients, what took place educationally K-12. I think the answer is in many cases, yes. In other cases, no. But I think, this is the opportunity to knit together, that relationship between the K-12 experience and the post-secondary education experience. And the county entity to support that is Foster Youth Services Coordinating Program. They do now have a post-secondary education mandate. They're the ones who have and can continue to play that critical role. A school district is tens of thousands of students, of which maybe a couple dozen might be foster youth. They are needles in a haystack, but for the FYSCP program, they're the people that know where those needles are, track those needles, and can really make sure that their needs get met. So, we're delighted that that program now has that post-secondary education mandate. We want to make sure other parts of county government are aware of it and coordinating with it. It's such a tremendous resource, and so much of what we've been able to achieve in K-12 has been possible because of that program. So I guess maybe one last question, and which one to do? We definitely have more. Here's the question. It's a very good one, and it definitely resonates with me as a former provider. We have issues with apartment complexes not wanting to keep our youth when issues arise, even when we're willing to continue to work with the youth. And so this really speaks to the difficult role providers can be in. Most of the properties in THP Plus and FC, the provider is a master leaser. Sometimes they own it. Most of the times they don't own it. And there's really strengths and weaknesses to owning the property versus not owning the property. But that provider is the intermediary, trying to keep the young person stably housed and served, trying to keep the property owner paid and happy. And that can, they're not nonprofits. They can be wonderful, caring community members, but their mandate is not our mandate. So I guess all I can really say about that is it's a very real issue, and how to share strategies across the county and the state about how organizations very actively manage their property owners and cultivate a deep relationship and connections. There's a lot of strategies out there, and we have done some web seminars on how to do that, but they require as much TLC, I don't want to say as much TLC as the youth, but they require their own set of services as well. And just in my anecdotal experience, that is appreciated by some providers, maybe less appreciated by others. But because when the candle turns into a fire, or the fight turns into domestic violence, the quality of the relationship at that moment is going to be whether they want that kid kicked out or whether they're willing to work with you. And so I'm really glad that point was brought up, because it's a very fair one. There's a lot of other issues that were raised, and I apologize that we weren't able to get to all of them, but thank you for hanging in there. We definitely exceeded our time. We were supposed to be done at 11:15. We will cull through these questions and comments and share them with you. We're also going to circulate the sample support letter for SB 12, and we'll also direct you to CalFresh resources. The good news is there's more and more clarity on the state level around CalFresh for foster youth. The job now is for it to penetrate to the community level. And so we'll share what we have for what that's worth, and also to encourage county representatives to attend a workshop that Simone is co-leading with several others on CalFresh and NMDs, or youth in foster care. So that's going to be a really good one. I know they're working hard on that for the upcoming CWDA conference. So thank you again for your time. We'll be sending out the materials later, and that ends today's web seminar.